The blood pressure monitor on my wrist started beeping at 180/120 right there in Rick Palmer's office. Funny timing, you know? Getting fired tends to spike your numbers. "You're no longer a culture fit, Nathan," Rick said, not even looking up from his tablet. Just like that. 14 years, and the guy couldn't even make eye contact. I'm sitting there thinking about Megan's tuition bill, 60 grand a year at Northwestern, and my dad asking me yesterday if I'd lost our business. He's got dementia, but sometimes he's clearer than the rest of us. Turns out he was right to worry. "Kyle Torres will be taking over as COO, Rick continued. Kyle, the kid I personally hired 3 years ago. The one I taught our system architecture to on weekends. The same Kyle who used to come to our family barbecues and called me mentor. So there I was, 47 years old, getting fired from the company I built by two guys who wouldn't know a line of code if it bit them. The kicker? I still legally owned the whole damn thing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Austin, 2009. The economy's in the toilet, but Rick and I figured that's when you start something new. We had this tiny office by Lady Bird Lake that smelled like wet carpet and had an air conditioner that sounded like a freight train. Rick would wave his hands around talking about data revolution and paradigm shifts while I sat there with my laptop, actually building the thing. The early days were brutal. I'm talking 16-hour days, living on coffee and determination. Our first major client was a logistics company that gave us 3 weeks to build something their previous vendor couldn't deliver in 6 months. I spent 72 straight hours writing custom algorithms while Rick handled the client calls, keeping them calm while I worked miracles in the background. That's how it always was. Rick had the vision and the connections. I had the technical skills and the work ethic my father had drilled into me. Dad owned a hardware store for 30 years. Taught me that you build something right the first time, or you don't build it at all. Rick had this problem, though. Some legal mess from his previous company. I never got the full story at the time. Point is, when we went to file the incorporation papers, he couldn't put his name down as owner. "Just temporary, Nate," he said across that coffee-stained table at Mozart's. "Soon as my situation clears up, we'll fix the paperwork." I should have known better. I did know better. But Rick had the connections to get us that first contract, and I had the ability to deliver something nobody else could. Seemed like a fair trade. So I signed my name on that line, owner, Nathan Walsh, 100%. That was 14 years ago. The paperwork never got fixed. See, while Rick was out there playing CEO, I was doing the real work, writing the code that became our core platform, hiring the team, training people like Kyle, who showed up fresh out of college with good grades and zero clue how to actually build software systems. I remember those weekend sessions with Kyle. Kid was eager, I'll give him that. We'd sit in the office Saturday afternoons, and I'd walk him through our architecture. "Look, Kyle," I'd tell him, "business isn't about the presentations. It's about building something that actually works and lasts." He'd nod and take notes. Even came to a few family barbecues. My ex-wife Lisa used to joke that Kyle was like the son we never had. That stings now, thinking about it. During our divorce proceedings last year, Lisa's lawyer kept harping on my work obsession and how it affected my ability to be a good father. Maybe they had a point, but someone had to keep Baylight running. Kyle went back to school for his MBA 2 years ago. Came back different. Started talking about modernization and fresh energy and scaling for the next generation. Still took my guidance on technical stuff, but something had shifted. I found out later he'd hired some career consultant during his program. Probably told him what they always tell ambitious young guys. Old leadership is holding you back. The signs were there if I'd wanted to see them. My system access got quietly restricted. Reports I'd written for years suddenly had Kyle's name on them. Client meetings I'd been running for a decade, Kyle started attending those solo. "Just streamlining the process, Nate," Rick would say when I asked. Then my doctor started getting worried about my blood pressure. The stress was getting physical. Dr. Martinez took one look at my readings and said, "Nathan, you keep this up, we're talking about heart attack territory." Between the work pressure, the divorce, and Dad's medical bills hitting 8 grand a month for his nursing care, I was running on fumes. The morning they fired me, I'd actually prepared a presentation about our system upgrade strategy. Spent 3 weeks on it. Had charts showing how we could improve performance by 40% without touching our core architecture. I was excited to show Rick and the board. Instead, I got 8 words. "You're no longer a culture fit, Nathan." I didn't argue. Didn't make a scene. Just said I understand and walked out. The whole hallway went quiet as I passed. Some of the younger hires didn't even know who I was, but they could sense something was happening. Maria at the front desk. She's been there since year 2. She just looked at me with these sad eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mr. Walsh." First time in months anyone there had shown me basic respect. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for maybe 20 minutes, just trying to process it. The blood pressure monitor kept beeping. I was thinking about calling Megan, but what would I say? Hey honey, Dad just got fired, so about that tuition. That's when my phone rang. Tony Russo. I hadn't heard from Tony in maybe 6 months, but he was the lawyer who handled our original incorporation back in '09. Nate, I heard what happened this morning. You doing okay? Been better, Tony. You hear about this stuff fast. Austin's a small town when it comes to business news. Listen, you got time to stop by my office? There's something we should discuss. An hour later, I'm sitting across from Tony in his downtown office. He's got this old steel filing cabinet that looks like it survived a fire, and he's pulling out folders I hadn't seen in over a decade. You remember signing these? He slides a stack of papers across the desk. There it is. Original incorporation documents for Baylight Dynamics. Owner Nathan Walsh, 100%. I'm staring at this paper like it's some artifact from another life. Tony, that was temporary. We were supposed to change it once Rick's legal issues cleared up. Did you ever file amended articles of incorporation? No. Rick said he'd handle it. Tony leans back in his chair. Nate, as far as the state of Texas is concerned, you are the sole legal owner of Baylight Dynamics. Always have been. That's when it hit me. I didn't get fired from some job. I got fired from my own company. There's more, Tony says, flipping through the bylaws. Any contract over $5 million requires the owner's signature. I've been tracking some of Rick's recent deals. That Petrochem contract he signed last month? $12 million. Unauthorized. I sat there trying to wrap my head around it. For 14 years, I'd thought of myself as the technical co-founder, the guy behind the scenes. Turns out I was the guy who owned the whole operation. What happens if Petrochem finds out Rick didn't have authority to sign? They could void the contract. Maybe sue for unauthorized execution. It's a mess, Nate. That evening, Tony filled me in on some background research he'd done. Rick's previous company, Palmer Tech Solutions, wasn't just a failure, it was a spectacular crash. Rick had raised $3 million, hired 40 employees, and burned through it all in 18 months. The investors lost everything, and there were lawsuits alleging mismanagement and questionable expense reporting. His father built Mercer Oil, Tony told me, over bourbon in his office. Successful guy, old school. Rick's been trying to prove himself ever since Palmer Tech folded. That's probably why he couldn't have his name on the Baylight Incorporation. Legal exposure from the previous company. So Rick wasn't just ambitious, he was desperate. And desperate people make dangerous decisions. I drove home that night with a copy of those incorporation papers on my passenger seat. My apartment's nothing special. Divorced guy living alone, you know the drill. But I made some coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and really looked at that document. 14 years. I'd built Baylight's core systems, hired most of the team, trained the next generation, and somehow convinced myself I was just an employee who could be dismissed whenever Rick felt like it. My phone buzzed. Text from Megan. Dad, Mom says there might be issues with tuition payment. What's going on? That's when I knew I had to fight back. Not for revenge or ego, for my daughter's future, for my father's care, for the 200 people working at Baylight who deserved leadership that actually understood what the company did. But first, I needed to understand what Rick and Kyle were really up to. Turns out they'd been busier than I thought. The next morning, Tony calls me with some interesting research. Rick had hired a PR firm to manage transition communications. Kyle had been meeting with headhunters about next-level leadership opportunities. They'd been planning my exit for months. Meanwhile, Kyle was playing a different angle. I heard through Adrian in IT, one of the few people still willing to talk to me, that Kyle had been holding these culture alignment meetings, basically telling the younger staff that Baylight needed to evolve past its legacy limitations. Legacy limitations. That's what I'd become. The thing is, Kyle wasn't wrong about everything. The company did need some modernization. Our user interface could use work. Our marketing approach was probably too technical for some clients. But you don't fix those things by throwing out the foundation and hoping the building doesn't collapse. Kyle started avoiding me completely after the firing. He used to stop by my office daily with questions about system architecture, database optimization, client technical requirements. Now he'd send emails about things we used to discuss face-to-face. I'd see him in meetings with other staff and he couldn't make eye contact. The kid who used to call me for advice about everything from coding challenges to career decisions was treating me like I had some contagious disease. I found out later that his MBA career consultant had given him specific advice. You'll never advance to C-level while the founder generation is protecting territory. Sometimes you have to choose between loyalty and career growth. 3 days after my firing, the first domino fell. The bank called Rick, asking about ownership clarification before renewing Baylight's credit line. Apparently, someone had raised questions about the company's legal structure. I didn't make that call, but I didn't stop it either. By Tuesday morning, you could feel the panic spreading through the office. Adrian cornered me in the parking lot when I went to clean out some personal items I'd forgotten. "Nathan, half the dev team is updating their resumes," he said, looking around nervously. "Maria's asking HR if her health insurance is still good. People are scared." "What are they hearing?" "Rumors about financial problems. Kyle called an all-hands meeting yesterday, talking about temporary cash flow challenges and maintaining operational stability. But you know how these things go. People hear cash flow challenges and start thinking the company's about to fold." That afternoon, our biggest client called Rick directly. Petrochem's CTO wanted to review their contract terms, specifically around authorization and corporate signatures. Word was getting out, and clients were getting nervous. By Friday, Rick was calling emergency meetings. The payroll company was asking questions about corporate structure before processing the next cycle. A couple of major clients wanted to review their contract terms. Kyle's fresh energy presentation to the board got postponed when half the attendees started asking about fundamental business operations instead of listening to slides about modernization strategies. The vendor payments got suspended too. Our hosting provider, the coffee service, even the cleaning company, they all wanted cash up front until corporate governance issues got resolved. When you've got 200 employees and contractors who depend on steady payments, these kinds of disruptions create real fear. That's when Carl Brennan reached out. Carl's been on our board since year 4. Retired CFO from a Fortune 500 company, old school guy who actually reads financial statements instead of just looking at the pretty charts. "Nathan, we need to talk." Unofficially. We met at a barbecue place on the east side. Carl ordered brisket and got straight to the point. "I've been watching this situation develop, and frankly, I'm concerned. Rick's been making some aggressive moves lately without proper board oversight. This morning I asked to see the incorporation documents. Took him 3 hours to produce them, and when he did, my name's still on them." "Your name's the only name on them." "Nathan, did you know you legally own this company?" "Just found out this week." Carl took a long look at his plate. "I've been in corporate governance for 30 years. I've seen hostile takeovers, management buyouts, succession battles, but I've never seen someone get fired from their own company. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went fishing. Took my dad's old boat out to Lake Travis, just me in the water and some time to think. My phone kept buzzing with calls from Rick, then Kyle, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail. When I finally listened to them Sunday night, the messages told the story. "Rick, Nathan, we need to discuss this situation professionally. Call me back." Kyle, "Hey, this is getting complicated. Maybe we can work something out." Unknown number, probably their lawyer, Mr. Walsh, "We represent Baylight Dynamics and need to schedule a meeting regarding corporate governance issues." They were scared. Good, but I wasn't looking for revenge. The stress of the past week had been brutal. I'd had 2 more blood pressure spikes, barely slept, and Megan had called 3 times asking if everything was okay because I sounded weird on our previous call. Monday morning, I put on my best suit and drove to Baylight's offices. Same glass tower where Rick had fired me a week earlier. But this time, I wasn't going to the 12th floor. I was going to the lobby to meet with building management. "I need to review the lease agreement for Baylight Dynamics," I told the property manager. She pulled up the file. "Are you authorized to access this information?" I handed her a copy of the incorporation documents. "I'm the owner." 30 minutes later, I had a copy of our lease. Guess whose signature wasn't on it? Rick's. The lease was signed by our CFO under corporate authority, but the corporate authority traced back to me. Then I drove to our bank. Same conversation, same documents, same result. Every major agreement, every line of credit, every business relationship ultimately depended on the legal entity I owned. Rick had been playing CEO for 14 years without actually having legal authority to bind the company to major obligations. Meanwhile, Rick was in full damage control mode. He'd hired a crisis management firm and was holding daily meetings with department heads, trying to project stability while everything was falling apart behind the scenes. I heard from Adrian that Rick had started blaming the situation on disgruntled former employees and frivolous legal challenges. The irony was thick. Rick was calling me a disgruntled former employee when I'd never actually been an employee. I was the owner he'd somehow forgotten about. Tuesday, Tony and I walked into the board meeting Rick had called to address recent disruptions. The conference room was packed, full board, senior staff, even a couple of investors who'd flown in from Dallas. Rick started with his prepared remarks about maintaining stability and not letting procedural questions derail our growth momentum. Kyle had slides about leadership continuity and stakeholder confidence. They were good presentations, professional, convincing if you didn't know the underlying facts. Kyle talked about fresh energy and next-generation approaches while carefully avoiding any mention of how he'd gotten his promotion or what had happened to the guy who'd trained him. When they finished, Tony stood up and handed out copies of the incorporation documents to every person at the table. Ladies and gentlemen, I represent Nathan Walsh, the sole legal owner of Baylight Dynamics. We're here to clarify some misconceptions about corporate governance. You could hear a pin drop. Rick's face went white. Kyle just stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Carl Brennan spoke first. Rick, is this accurate? It's a technicality. Nathan was a placeholder on the original filing. Everyone knows I've been running this company since day one. Running it, yes. But did you have legal authority to execute the Petrochem contract? Rick looked around the room for support. We're talking about $12 million in revenue. Are we really going to avoid that over paperwork? That's when I finally spoke up. Rick, it's not paperwork. It's the law, and it's not just Petrochem. How many other contracts did you sign without proper authority? The next 2 hours were not pleasant. Rick tried every argument in the book. I was just the technical guy. Everyone knew he was the real CEO. The board had been operating under reasonable assumptions. Investors had been told he was in charge. None of it mattered. Law is law, but here's the thing. I didn't want to destroy the company I'd spent 14 years building. During that board meeting, I watched Kyle sitting there, probably remembering all those weekend training sessions, all the advice I'd given him about both technical issues and career development. The kid looked genuinely conflicted, not just scared about his job, but ashamed about how things had played out. By Thursday, we'd reached an arrangement that made sense for everyone. Rick would transition to a business development role, still important, still compensated, but no longer making unilateral decisions about the company's future. His network and strategic thinking had real value. He just needed proper oversight. Kyle could stay as VP of operations, but with clear reporting structures and no more end runs around established processes. I didn't want to destroy these guys. Rick had brought valuable connections and strategic thinking to Baylight, even if he'd overstepped his authority. Kyle had good instincts about user experience and marketing, even if he'd gotten too ambitious too quickly. But I also wasn't going to pretend the last 14 years didn't happen. The first thing I did as official CEO was call an all-hands meeting. 200 people in the main conference room, and I could see the questions in their eyes. Half of them barely knew who I was. The other half were wondering if they still had jobs. I know there's been a lot of uncertainty this week I started. Some of you are probably wondering what happens next. Here's what I can tell you. Baylight is stable, your jobs are secure, and we're going to keep building great software. I didn't give them a big vision speech or talk about paradigm shifts. I just told them the truth. We had good fundamentals, we'd been making some questionable decisions lately, and now we were going to get back to focusing on what we did best. After the meeting, Adrian from IT came up to me. Nathan, there's a bunch of system issues we've been dealing with for months. Rick and Kyle kept telling us to work around them instead of fixing the root problems. Show me. We spent 3 hours going through technical debt that had been building up while Rick focused on growth initiatives and Kyle worked on process optimization. Basic maintenance that should have been routine had been deferred because it wasn't flashy enough for board presentations. Database queries that were running slower every month because nobody wanted to spend time on unglamorous optimization work. That evening I was back in my apartment, finally able to relax for the first time in weeks. My blood pressure monitor showed 140/90, still high but better. I called Megan. Dad, Mom said your job situation got resolved. Yeah, sweetheart. Tuition's covered. No worries there. What happened exactly? The whole thing sounded weird. How do you explain to your 18-year-old daughter that you got fired from your own company by people you'd trained and then had to use legal documents to get it back? Just some confusion about corporate structure. It's handled now. Are you okay though? You sounded really stressed last week. Mom was worried about you. I'm better. Hey, how's that organic chemistry class going? We talked for another 20 minutes about school and her plans for summer break. Normal stuff. The kind of conversation I'd been too distracted to have properly for months. She told me about joining the debate team and how her roommate was from California and had never seen real snow before visiting Northwestern. Regular father-daughter talk that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep things stable. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about Kyle. The kid I'd mentored, who'd sat at this same kitchen table working through coding problems during his first year with us, who'd called me when he was struggling with his student loans, and I'd co-signed that $15,000 emergency loan without hesitation because I believed in him. I wasn't angry at Kyle anymore. Disappointed, sure, but I understood the pressure he'd been under. Young guy, ambitious, getting advice from consultants and career coaches who probably told him that loyalty was a career killer in modern business. The next morning, Kyle knocked on my office door. He looked like he hadn't slept much. "Nathan, can we talk?" "Sure, sit down." He fidgeted with his phone for a minute before speaking. "I know I screwed up. I know you trusted me, and I got caught up in the politics. Kyle, I'm not going to fire you. You're good at what you do. But we need to reset some boundaries." "I appreciate that. I really do. I guess I thought I needed to choose sides, and I chose wrong. There weren't supposed to be sides. That was the problem. We spent the next hour working out a reporting structure that made sense. Kyle would focus on operations and user experience, things he was actually good at. I'd handle technical architecture and overall strategy. Rick would work on business development and client relationships. It wasn't the same as it had been before. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But it was functional, and it was honest. 6 months later, we landed our biggest contract ever. $18 million with a logistics company that needed custom supply chain software. The difference was, this time, we had proper authority to sign it, proper processes to deliver it, and proper communication between all levels of management. The client meetings were interesting. I'd handle the technical discussions, architecture, security, scalability requirements. Kyle would present user experience mock-ups and implementation timelines. Rick would manage the business relationship and contract terms. Instead of competing with each other, we actually complemented each other's strengths. Rick still plays golf with potential clients. Kyle still gives presentations about user experience improvements. And I still write code when the architecture gets complex. The difference is, now everyone knows what everyone else is supposed to be doing. My dad had a good day last week. Clear, focused, asking detailed questions about the business. I was able to tell him that yes, we still owned it. Yes, it was doing well. Yes, his son had figured out how to handle the situation without burning everything down. He smiled and patted my hand. "I knew you'd work it out, Nathan. You always were the smart one." The health issues got better too. Dr. Martinez was pleased with my latest readings, 130 over 85, which he called much more manageable for a guy your age dealing with your level of responsibility. I started taking evening walks around the neighborhood instead of working until 10 p.m. every night. Turns out when you're not constantly fighting internal politics, you have energy left over for taking care of yourself. If you're listening to this and you're dealing with something similar, getting pushed aside at work, feeling like younger people are trying to replace you, wondering if your experience still matters, let me tell you something. Document everything. Know your legal rights. And don't assume that because someone's been doing a job, they have the authority to do that job. But also don't assume that fighting back means destroying everyone who crossed you. Sometimes the best revenge is just being professional and letting competence speak for itself. Rick's doing fine in his new role. Turns out he's actually better at business development than he was at trying to run technical operations he didn't understand. Kyle's learning to channel his ambition more constructively, and his ideas about user experience have genuinely improved our products. The company's growing, the employees are happy, and we're solving problems instead of creating them. And Megan's starting her sophomore year at Northwestern next month. Full tuition paid, no stress, no drama. She's thinking about majoring in computer science, which makes me proud. Maybe she'll build something even better than what I did. Sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to. You just have to be patient enough to let them